Hi, everyone. Welcome to episode 7 of Beyond Borders by MSA. For those that don't know, MSA Novo is one of the only global institutional funds systematically investing in emerging technology markets. And with Beyond Borders, we host the world's leading technology founders and game changers. So I'm so excited to have with me two portfolio companies of MSA today, Tabby and Cider. From Cider, we have Yu Oppel, which is the co-founder and CMO, and from Tabby, we have Zain Khan, the director of business development. And today, I think the topic is something that's very exciting, where we see two sectors overlap and really complement each other within the growth of their own market. So we're going to be really shedding light on how fintech and fashion have really enabled each other and have really catalyzed and driven the growth of each sector. So I want to start by briefly introducing our companies today, and then I'll leave it to Zain and you to take it from there. Um, so starting off with Cider, Cider is a global social first fashion brand founded in 2020. Cider reached unicorn status within the first year of its debut, and it serves millions of customers worldwide across 130 countries. The brand expanded into the Middle East actually in July 2021 and has been one of the fastest growing markets for Cider. So it's super exciting to have you here. Most of our audience are actually from the Middle East today. So I'm sure everyone has heard about Tabby. So we are super proud of Tabby on being the Middle East's first fintech unicorn, founded in 2019 by Hussam Arab. And Tabby is leading the buy now, pay later provider in the Middle East and has really transformed short term financing in the region. So, having said that, I'll leave the rest to you and Zain. And I'd like to start with the first question, I think, to you. So, what were the beginnings of Cider, and how did you really establish the brand back in 2020? So we've seen that the brand had a very humble beginning, founded by a bunch of friends, and it's now become a global fashion phenomenon. So, would love to hear the story behind that.
Sure, yeah. So it was mid 2020. The world was very different then. And coming from tech and fashion, my co-founders and I, we saw this unprecedented opportunity to blend these two worlds together and create a social first fashion brand. So we use technology as a springboard to launch this brand, unique in its promise. A variety of styles, affordability, and also high quality all-in-one offering. So that's how Cider was born. But we also wanted more than just a brand. We want to spark joy in the everyday moments, especially during the time of separation at the time. So, Cider came to life, echoing the cheerfulness of clinking glasses with your friends and savoring simple pleasures in life. It's bubbly, sweet, and had just the right amount of attitude. So that's the spirit, from the name that we want to convey. And speaking of how we grew so quickly, the unique point of view in our designs, in the styles, plus the affordable price point, it really filled a gap in the market at the time. And involving the community is also very, very key to our success. So recognizing the shift from, top down, big retailer influence to, social media and micro trends, we wanted to create a social first and bottom up brand that actively engages the community. So we invest in building this two-way communication channel with our customers across, all these different parts of the world, shaping our versatile mood-based collections around their preferences and championing self-expression.
Okay, fantastic. And I think that really also spans into your smart fashion model, which I'm sure we'll get into later on. So, Zain, tell us a bit about your journey in leading business development and partnerships across your career.
Thanks, Sarah, and pleasure to be here. I love the name of the podcast, by the way. Beyond Borders is pretty apt. Uh, to jump right into your question, I think the experience has been pretty interesting to say the least, right? I've spent a lot of time actually in buy now, pay later, almost 9 years now. So, before moving to the Middle East, it was primarily India based. So, the very different market, massive scale, and that came with very interesting, uh, you know, challenges when it comes to pricing power. At that time, India was not only going through like this digitization age, but globally as well. You'd see large giants chasing GMV, so it was kind of like the wild, wild west when startups became cool again post the 2000 dot-com bust. So I think at that time it was this massive boom period, and then suddenly you had the entire country demonetize one of the largest forms of currency notes. And that led to an immediate stop in cash usage in a country that was largely cash dependent. And the transition that fintech led for the country from that moment on was pretty interesting. And I think it kind of prepped me up for what the Middle East was about to go through from a buy now, pay later perspective a few years later, because you had to drop everything you were doing, speak to literally all your merchants, what challenges are you facing, uh, develop a paying solution for one of them within a day and have them go live, right? Because otherwise, their entire business is at a standstill. And I think stuff like that was pretty interesting. The Middle East has been a lot different. It's more relationship based. At the same time, very very fast moving. It doesn't need a rapid infrastructural shock like demonetization to be able to move as that fast. It just does it. It wants to move that fast. So I think I love having had the opportunity to explore different businesses, different business models across different markets, and I think that continues to drive me till this day. And I think meeting lovely people along the way is a cherry on the top. And I think perfect example of that is actually Cider. Way back in 2021, when Cider was expanding, we'd seen it pop up across certain ad platforms, running certain ads. And we were kind of curious about the brand. And I think at that particular point in time, Hassam spoke to Tony, and I remember very succinctly, we were talking about what challenges Cider was facing in the Middle East. And one of them, ironically, was cash on delivery, right? Cider was addressing this very big question on should we launch cash on delivery or not? And I think at that point, I remember us discussing, and our point of view was like, don't, you don't need it. A lot of this is solved by COVID, and COD rates have dropped drastically. And, the market share for cash on delivery is still large, but it's declining. So maybe don't jump into it right away. Solve for other problems, and then you can launch cash on delivery later on if need be. It's always easy to launch something new a bit later as opposed to then launch it but roll it back because there are certain issues. And I think since then it's been a pretty amazing journey working with the Cider team, and yeah, I'm glad to have that we at Tabby could have helped them solve some of these issues, and at the same time helps us learn about an interesting approach to, I guess, fast fashion that Cider's been taking. I think you've done a brilliant job in describing the brand ethos, and I think no one can do a better job at that. But it's businesses like these that keep us excited.
We actually did launch cash on delivery last February, but I do think the advice was pretty helpful. So obviously, launching Tabby was much easier than launching cash on delivery. But since we wanted that full-on localized experience, we still went and solved the bigger challenge last February,
Yep.
and launched cash on delivery as well.
Yeah, and Zain, and you touched upon something that's important, and we'll definitely talk about later on, is that launching with something that already exists and consumers are already used to, like cash on delivery, is really just takes the cash economy one step further and prevents us from introducing new technologies and new payment methods and having people adapt to these new payment methods and digitalize these payment systems. So definitely great approach with launching BNPL digital payments first, and then cash delivery comes second, because you need to take these consumers out of their comfort zone in order to be able to actually grow and develop the market. So, like we said, I mean, global fashion e-commerce is one of the fastest growing verticals in correlation with payment accessibility. And I think all over the world, so not just in emerging markets or in the Middle East. And by no doubt, the top industry and battlefield for payments is really e-commerce and fashion at the moment. So I mean, this question is for both of you. Tell us a bit more about how this has driven the expansion of your respective spaces.
Yeah, I think you're spot on. And I think it's become very competitive for one very core reason, right? And I think that's frequency. You get the right quality of the consumer, and just happens to be the core target audience for a lot of fintechs out there, which are these young e-commerce shoppers that are tech savvy, and probably early adopters for a lot of digital natives that are about to pop up, right? So it has a pretty decent network effect of having the moment you onboard these shoppers. What it also meant was that for a lot of fintechs, the lifetime value of these customers ends up being pretty high, right? Because on one end, you have a shopper, let's say, being acquired through an e-commerce platform that then is probably going to use you on other e-commerce platforms. And the more of them being fashion, the better it is, because that just gives you higher frequency. And as a result, you end up, being able to break even or profit from these customers a lot quicker than other segments like, let's say, electronics or travel, which are used probably once or twice a year, um, and may not give you a large network effect uh, from those. So I think it's been interesting to see how this has actually played out across markets. You have certain industries and markets where you've seen fashion e-commerce players actually offload their cost of acquisition onto fintechs by kind of leveraging their reach or their platform, and charging for access in the form of integration fees or marketing fees and so on and so forth. Um, Whereas in mature markets, that's kind of calmed down a bit, and you've moved on from that to now discussing how these fintechs can add mutual value, right? So yes, the fintechs are given access to these fashion platforms, but at the same time, what can the fintechs give in return if not an integration fee or some form of discounting? And what is that that's more long term, sustainable in the long term that fintechs can help unlock? And I think that's been an interesting conversation to have seen popped up in the last few years. And I think it's also the right way to go. It shows that the industry is maturing, and we've moved on from the initial euphoria of thinking of things as access or one-sided, uh, fitment. And I think that's the right way to go. I'm sure you've seen this play out in a very different way across other markets, given the number of regions you guys look at. Yeah, I think you guys would probably have all the more an interesting insight on how you guys work with fintechs there.
To be honest, for us, when we think about global expansion, we always want to meet the customers where they are. So if cash on delivery were easier to implement, we would have wanted to turn it on for, since day one. But obviously, you could imagine it's like a huge operations challenge. So we wanted to go, with a lightweight approach first. So when we think about, reaching customers around the world, it's not just about, translating our website app into different languages. We really dive into the whole shopping experience and want to, make sure it's as localized as possible. So it means, looking at everything from how the customers first find out about us, whether it's through ads or social media influencers, for example, to the way they browse and buy on our site, add to cart, payment, right? And then focus on making returns and support as smooth as possible as well. And, sometimes we even create special collections that we think will be a hit in certain places. Like we actually recently launched a special Ramadan edit with a local influencer this year. So today, we actually have a distributed team across 15 countries, and we've set up 17 warehouses across multiple countries like US, UK, Germany, Italy, Korea, China. And support is on standby 24/7 in 7 languages right now. So this is sort of the scale and the level of, global expansion that we are going into. And I think it has to be done in this level of meticulousness. And we have to localize the entire experience as much as possible to compete with local brands. There's no other way. It's not just about spreading our reach, but really you have to connect with the customers in their own context. And this approach, I know it's sometimes can be painstaking. It takes a while. It doesn't happen easily and doesn't happen fast. Um, but this approach has been a game changer for us and really setting the stage for our growth worldwide, I believe. And, one of the biggest things regarding payments we've learned is, it's really important to have the right solutions and thinking about the local nuances as well. And it's not just about the payment method. You also have to look out for risk and fraud. It's, a whole package. And different places have different favorites. Like Afterpay for Australia, Kakao Pay is non-negotiable in Korea, for example. And we've added Tabby, like they mentioned, in September 2022. So it's quickly become a favorite in that region. So very happy about the integration. Like I mentioned earlier, we really want to go full on with the localization. So we enabled cash on delivery last February as well. And it's been a constant challenge for sure because, margin wise, if we could get more efficient, with either fraud detections or, payment processing fees, it definitely adds up. So we're constantly looking at, how we can, of course, ensure a smooth experience and localized experience as much as possible, but also thinking about the numbers as well as we continue to scale.
Yeah. And that's actually quite interesting. Like if you think about the perception of building a fashion brand in the digital realm, a lot of the youngsters or young generations have such a simplified notion of it, isn't it? Like, hey, I want to build a really cool brand, and sell my stuff online. But it's actually so hard. Like, you have so many challenges, right? And as you pointed out, you've got to expand, localize, all the while keeping a very close eye on your funnel. And I think, to your point, the fintech example is actually spot on because, like, just thinking out loud, there's so many different use cases when it comes to working with someone on payments, right? So, as an example, like cash on delivery is one, and we've seen that evolve to now people or these cash on delivery, these delivery providers now roaming around with POS terminals, right, to convert that into card on delivery, just to solve for the cash flow issue and not have to send cash back from one place to another and then get it back to a merchant. But also starting from reach, one of the key things that a lot of small businesses specifically that are looking to expand online are really struggling with is the high cost of acquisition. It's become a very competitive space, a lot of money being spent on acquiring these consumers, and then at the same time acquiring is just step one, right? You've got to get that customer to land on your
You
website,
gotta
work with
retain
a lot of
them.
exactly. You've got to convert them, retain them, make sure they don't return the product, and like, yeah, it's crazy. And I think to your point, Sarah, I think this is actually, I think, one of the ways in which this actually becomes a win-win, right? The only way for payment providers or fintechs to actually add value to the ecosystem than to just process one transaction and forget about it is to actually think about how can we actually play a part in every single point of the life cycle that our partners are trying to build out with their consumers, right? Starting from acquisition to conversion to retention to retargeting, and generally how can we get them more from that customer over time. And I think that's been the core ethos for us, having worked in payments and a lot of our team coming from e-commerce. I think marrying the two worlds is the only way to kind of sustain this in the long term and really focus on what matters as opposed to short term conversations like we're paying you for access, what do uh, what customers can you get help me acquire. Like, usually there's a more valuable conversation to be had on, okay, let's keep aside the point of access and acquisition for a time being and talk about just generally what are your challenges today, right? Like, what's bothering you the most, and what do you want to solve for now, what are you leaving for later to get to, and let's look at what our partnership could look like in a year or 2 years out and think a bit long term. And that conversation, it tends to be pretty surprising. We've discovered that card on delivery that I mentioned about earlier was a use case for a large lot of e-commerce retailers that just felt like cash on delivery was difficult to ignore, right? Like you cannot ignore it, and it's a big conversion unlock. But there were two problems. One is returns, fine, that has to be solved for, but cash flow. And then it was like, okay, you know what? Maybe we can help with returns, but we definitely can help with cash flow. So then we started working with most delivery providers to kind of become enabled on their POS devices so that they could tell a customer, hey, you know what? Your order's out for delivery. It's going to reach you in the next 1 hour. You can convert your payments to a split in four transaction and just pay 25% of it right now. And then we started measuring the impact that this had on conversion away from cash to Tabby, but also impact on returns. And surprisingly, returns dropped, right? Because the customer was like, when this actually reaches my doorstep, I've got to put up 100% of the cash. Why not just pay 25%? And as a result, we ended up unlocking lower buyer's remorse, right? So people regretted their purchases less and less. So it's like, you know what? Let me keep whatever I bought because I'm just paying for 25% of it. And that was an interesting insight to have, which we would have never actually gotten to if we didn't have that conversation on what exactly are these challenges, right? So yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely a package deal, like you said. I mean, fashion is a lifestyle commodity, and consumers will always seek convenience with payments. So, both of them are under the same customer journey, and they're really inseparable. So let's talk a bit more about the consumers in detail, and that overlap that we have with fashion and fintech when it comes to consumers. So I mean, when we look at Tabby, Tabby appeals to two distinct customer segments, and correct me if I'm wrong. So the first, I guess, is driven by the low credit card penetration in markets like Saudi Arabia, where only around 15% of the population has credit cards. In the UAE, the number is much higher; it's about 40 or 50%. But overall, in the GCC region, credit card penetration tends to be lower than I would say other markets in the world. And then the second consumer segment compromises of customers who find Tabby's payment method very convenient. Like we can buy things in bulk, but it's just much better if we pay in installments, right? Whether the purchase is as hefty as a Prada bag or maybe a basket from Amazon or one of these retailers, it's just a more convenient way, and consumers feel like they're paying less in a way. It's a psychological approach as well. And then when we look at cider, I would say that I guess it's mainly attractive or appeals to Gen Z consumers, which actually makes up more than 60% of the world's population. And based on a bunch of reports that I was looking at, an average of 40 to 45% of Gen Zers and millennials purchase fashion items on a weekly basis. So this consumer base have a very high frequency of spending, but also prefer to pay in cash or use prepaid cards or rely on digital credit card alternatives like Tabby. So I think that's where the two definitely overlap. So how are you able to merge your going back to smart fashion model with these market trends?
Sure. So we leverage a data-driven approach, which is, fundamental for our business. So you can consider Cider a tech business before a fashion brand. We are a tech company before, a fashion company. I guess it's really key to, how we run everything. So this involves, continuously analyzing consumer behavior, their preferences, their feedback to identify emerging trends and, adapt quickly. We'll then, incorporate these insights into our design, production, planning processes as well. So our smart fashion model is flexible. It allows us to quickly adapt to changing market demands by staying attuned to real-time data from various channels, for example, social media, industry trend forecast reports, sales analytics. We can swiftly introduce, new styles and adjust our inventory to reflect current trends and market needs instantly. So it allows for new items to be available online, within say 10 to 12 days on average. And also unsold stock only makes up less than 5% of our company's total stock, which, is significantly lower than industry average of 17 to 20%. So it makes business sense with this new model. And we also believe in the power of collaboration, because I think there's art and science in all of these. Working with fashion designers and influencers across the world, and they are deeply connected to the fashion world in their region, and that's very key. They help us keep our finger on the fashion pulse, ensuring our collections are not only trendy but also forward thinking and unique, relatable in that region. A great example of this is our recent Ramadan edit, which I mentioned earlier briefly, which we created in partnership with a local influencer, North Stars, and it received an incredibly positive response from the region.
That's probably like one of the ingredients to your secret sauce when it comes to expansion, because like you said, I mean, generally consumers follow the same trends, they have the same preferences, but there are really these little key secrets in every market, and it's all it takes to really unlock these markets. So, Zain, tell me about how you leverage these market trends that you spoke about. So, also from a data standpoint, how are you able to um, monitor these fashion trends and also predict how they're going to reflect into your different transactions and your business performance as well? So I think data is a key overlap between fintech and
Yep,
fashion here.
absolutely. And you're absolutely spot on. So I think, we've been fortunate enough because of the kind of business that we're in. We gather a lot of data, right? We know who our customers are because we KYC each and every one of them, right down to their gender, age, nationality. We also have an indication of their income profiles. And correlating that with spending patterns has been pretty interesting over the past few years. There are numerous applications. I think, one of these, as an example, has been, just generally our approach to how we work with some of our key partners. So we've made it like a pretty recurring conversation to be had around, hey guys, this is what we're seeing, right? Your consumers are shifting, and usually e-commerce retailers don't know the gender and they use the products being sold as a proxy for what the gender of the person that may be buying the product. And similarly, do not have an indication of age groups, right? You can get only so much through social media, but most customers check out as a guest. So how do you really unlock a lot of this? So the way we kind of work is, internally at Tabby, of course, there's numerous applications when it comes to, controlling credit risk, managing customers' credit limits in order to be able to be efficient at capital allocation, and stuff like that. But I think even largely, simple things like communications, right? At what point in time, let's say what point of the day, is it better to reach out to cohort A versus cohort B? Right? What are the channels that work best for them? And these learnings have really played out a lot in terms of not just how we service our customers at on checkout, but even post that, right? So it's kind of been woven into each and every single communication that we send out to customers, may it be with regards to uh, collections of that particular transaction down the line, and to a point where we realize we've gotten better at it than most debt collection agencies out there, right? Because we were able to marry the insights and the large treasure trove of data that we had and start really experimenting with different cohorts that we were able to build out. And on the same time, we kind of realized that our merchant partners were also kind of going through the same problems, right? You have to start figuring out very early on who your customers are, so that you can optimize on your advertising campaigns. You have to start to be able to figure out where the majority of your growth is coming from. And perfect example here is, let's say, take luxury fashion as a category, right? For decades and decades, you had luxury brands uh, kind of working with the notion that my consumer is this typical 30 plus year old high income consumer that has a certain lifestyle, drives a particular kind of car, goes to a specific kind of restaurant. And when we looked at the data, we saw a completely different picture, right? So we saw that a majority of these consumers were actually young millennials or Gen Zs And that's where a massive chunk of growth over the past 3 to 4 years was coming from for luxury fashion brands. And if you look at, they are your average Joe aspiring for a better lifestyle, right? I may be fresh out of college, I've landed a really cool job, and I want that bag, right? I want that really cool handbag that's trending at the moment, or whatever it may be. So I think, insights like these were really important for us to kind of highlight to our partners, saying, look, we understand that there is a particular brand ethos that's important to you, but at the same time, we want to be able to give you certain data points and help you make decisions from there on. And the way those conversations evolved was pretty interesting. So, that went to, okay, it seems like our acquisition channels are geared towards social media for branding purposes, but it seems like sales are being unlocked through some different channels. So that's when we became a discovery channel for consumers over time, because we were able to, on our end, by understanding the nature of, by understanding our customers better, their preferences, and so on, launch products like a live feed. Like, think of it like a smarter version of Google Shopping, right? So usually you go and search, let's say, Nike Air Force Ones on Google. It'll show you a few results from Nike.com and a few other retailers that are selling those pair of shoes. And what we did was we realized customers were on our app looking at which merchants accept Tabbies, and then they'd eventually go to that website and buy. We realized, okay, you know what? We have so much data on this consumer. We know their preferences. Why not just show them a live product feed right then and there? And that, led to a lot more engagement on the app. And very instantly, merchants realized that, okay, I can use the data Tabby has at a system level to target those customers on Tabby. So it was like this perfect marriage of the two worlds, right? Because we were able to sort one, intent, but also personalization, which would not have been possible without the data that we had, and so on. So
This space is highly competitive, and it's not enough for payment companies to just be payment providers. You really need to reinvent yourself. So let's talk a bit about the Middle East, given that this marriage has also happened in the Middle East. And it's always super interesting to get global insights from Cider, and Cider being a global company expanding into the Middle East, and just your perspective on that. So generally, when we look at the Middle East, consumers have the highest ARPU in the world. When it comes to sectors like fashion, gaming, commerce, the numbers are just absolutely crazy. And specifically when we're looking at markets like the GCC, consumers are very switched on in the Middle East, and they're always ready to try things. So tell us a bit about Cider's expansion into the region. In your perspective, what stood out from the rest of the markets, and also about the challenges that you faced as well?
Sure. So our launch in the Middle East, back in July 2021 has been pretty remarkable. The region has grown 50x since then, and is now one of our top markets. So definitely very excited about the growth, and excited to see, the future potential that market holds. And a few aspects really set Middle East apart from other regions we operate in. So notably, we did observe the highest average order value here, and coupled with, a stronger customer retention rate, which is also great. And recently, we've been just like what we've done with other regions, like in New York, in Seoul earlier, we also did an offline activation. We drove a truck in Dubai with our newest Ramadan collection, and we got to meet a lot of our community in real life. And getting their feedback in person was huge, and gives us more confidence as we continue to invest in this region. And speaking of challenges, definitely, all these infra challenges is no small feat, and setting up, say, efficient payment systems, customer support, logistics network, because we want to optimize for, as fast shipping and return speed as possible in this new region is definitely a substantial undertaking, and it's not achieved overnight. So the key of overcoming these hurdles has been to invest in a global team and with global mindset. And that's, we're always ready for new challenges, and we are, all about moving fast. So having that team members who understand the region's unique needs and nuances has been invaluable for us in navigating these challenges and played a crucial role in our successful expansion here. And that logic doesn't only apply in the Middle East. It's pretty much the same concept as the same approach as we think about expanding in other regions as well.
Would you ever consider opening up a physical store in some markets? Do you feel like physical stores might work better, or having pop-ups here and there?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, we've had some, experiments, I would say, over
Yeah.
the past year. We did a 2-week pop-up in Seoul in July, and also a shorter one in London shortly after. We did a 3-month pop-up in New York in November last year. And that was the official pop-up store we set up where you could actually try and buy the clothes there the first time. So we are definitely excited to try more and consider, future offline expansion as well. Because meeting people offline is just so different, and it's also a very effective customer acquisition channel as well.
So Zain, maybe going back to you now. So you spoke about different tactics that you're using and how you're leveraging data for a consumer perspective, but from as well a partnership perspective and for merchants, how has Tabby been able to really reinvent itself and offer value add services for merchants, specifically those that are now stepping foot in the Middle East, like Cider and other merchants? So what is really making Tabby attractive for these global merchants to come and set up shop, help them with localization, and help them really understand the market better?
Sure. I think, a lot of it is correlated to what you said. Like, it is quite complex to set up shop here, right? Like, there's a lot to go through, a lot to understand, a lot to experiment and figure out. And I think what's been our ethos always is that, because a lot of our team, especially Hassam, from his Namchi days, come from e-commerce or, payments, and a lot of us are very much exposed to the challenges that e-commerce businesses face. We've been pretty conscious of the fact that on the partnership side, right, it isn't actually a function of just processing a payment, right? Like, there's so many things that payment partners can actually do for their clients. It's not even funny, right? So right down to helping them understand uh, you know uh, insights about their industry. As an example, like, okay, you're targeting this particular segment, these are the primary shoppers in this industry that you should be looking at to acquiring in your first few days. And right down to, as an example, which is the best conversion tool out there in the market, right? There's a few of them. You may have cash on delivery providers that you want feedback on, and so on. And payment providers actually sit at the intersection of acquisition, conversion, and retention, right? So through our journey of working with different partners, we have been exposed to different vendors that e-commerce partners use, what they use them for, and what the impact has been as a result of them working together. So I think, for us, it's been always a consultative approach on, I think, hey, look, this is what we're seeing. This is what our advice is, even if it means we don't do the sale, right? And that's totally okay, because in most instances, we've kind of realized that this is very much a relationship driven market, right? And I think even globally, on the partnership side, a lot of the companies are realizing that the consultative sell is what scales, right? Because you cannot, otherwise, you're all just competing on price. At the end of it, a product or proposition can always be copied across any market, across any provider. So, what really sets you apart is, genuinely who you are and how you approach these conversations with partners. And I think, we realized very early on, that while this region was very relationship driven, it actually wasn't data driven because e-commerce and digitization was in its nascency back in 2020, right? And we kind of, took that up as a responsibility and said, look, you know what, we have to actually, you can't just call yourself a thought leader, you have to actually earn that. And, how do we get to that point? And one of those was churning out insights on a constant basis, which we shared with our partners through newsletters, in, business reviews that we had with them. Um, Even stuff that they didn't ask us for, right? We were just like, hey, you know what? We thought you'd find it interesting to know about XYZ. And that's it, start there, right? I think, and what we had to do on our end was really put ourselves in the shoes of that e-commerce partner to be able to, think of how do we add value, right? And that resulted in some very interesting opportunities for us, because what it allowed us to do was kind of work with the partner to build with them. And the perfect example here is the way we launched our first in-store offering, right? So it was COVID when we first went live in the market. And by the time the lockdowns opened up, we were ready with our first in-store BNPL offering in the GCC, which we launched with one of the retail conglomerates here, Al Futtaim. And since then we've optimized that to now be the first BNPL card in the region. We launched the first product discovery portal in the GCC, so the which we call the Tabby shop. And a lot of these are products that came from our experience of having these conversations with merchants on how can we help, what are your challenges you're facing, sharing data with them, and them reacting to that in a certain way and saying, hey, it would be interesting if you could give me this to be able to turn this data point into a monetary upside, things like that. And I think a lot of this starts from the consultative side, right? You've got to put yourself in the shoes of your client, think like they do, and just generally want to be able to help. And I think it all starts from there.
I think when we were starting just on Tabby, both of us are probably way smaller, and now it's just really excited to see the amazing growth that we both have achieved, and would love to obviously continue to invest in this region and share notes.
Well, let's wrap up a bit here. And I wanted to ask you both about how you think the future for both payments and online fashion will look like. So how will larger spaces like AI, Web3, and all of these different models that we're seeing now, how are they able to plug into your respective sectors? Or in general, I mean, if you have different thoughts about how the future would look like.
It sounds like we're on one of those earnings calls, right, where every single investor wants to know, hey, what are you doing about AI, right?
How do
But
you
I think
see
it's at the
yourself
same.
in 5 years?
Exactly. I've thought about this, to be honest. And honestly, a lot of this isn't that shiny, right? It starts from core annoying issues that are costing you money. And I think, one of the key focus areas here is, to that example, things like collections, customer service, which are very, rules based, that have a language component that is very difficult to localize for, especially if you're in multiple markets, and are clearly a cost advantage to realize the moment you're able to automate that. And the fact that, AI started with, kind of got commercialized with chat as a medium, has a lot to do with why the first application was kind of text based, right, on customer service and stuff like that. But I think where this is going is pretty interesting. I think I would be really curious to see if chat based commerce picks up and how payment providers can play a role there. And I think we've seen that kind of pick up in gaming in a lot of ways, right? With these digital products kind of being sold. And I think that will eventually feed into the growth of digital currencies. Despite whatever people say about crypto, I think blockchain as a use case is here to stay. And as a result, uh, currencies riding on that will always be a point of conversation. And I think that's where, at some point, I expect the marriage for payments and Web3 to kind of happen. And I think we're seeing the early stages of that with RippleNet and what they're doing on cross-border settlements, as an example. There'll be a lot more applications coming up on how certain transactions or data are stored on the blockchain. So, for example, on lending to businesses, right? there's so much you can do on automating the decision on whether this merchant or this business is worth lending to if I'm a bank, right? And I think a lot of that would be interesting to play out.
A use perspective also would be interesting. I know that you're very interested in the Web3 space, NFTs. I've seen some of your talks around that space, so would love to hear your perspective.
Sure, yeah. I mean, just to add to what Zain was talking about, like say GPT and how our life could be so different in 5 years. I'm thinking the future could potentially be, completely transformed within mere months instead of years at this point. Just thinking about how fast, just like things have progressed over the past year. So, uh, it's very exciting, but also kind of urges company like us to really be continue to be thinking ahead and how we can leverage these technologies. We use AI in our day to day, and even with the latest AIGC technology, we have a dedicated team internally thinking about how it can help us generate designs faster, fine tune our copy faster, have better translation, set up more robust support agents to help our customers globally. Like these things are all like day to day, very near and dear to our current operations. And when it comes to something like Web3 and NFT, that's not like what our that's something more thinking about the future. But I do think it's coming down the road one way or another. So despite the current challenges, right, with the infra, imagine a future where using a crypto wallet is just as effortless as using your Apple Wallet, and maybe the NFT that you own is just one of these cards. Like you save an Apple Wallet or something even easier. Maybe you just unlock it with your Face ID. I think that's how seamless and smooth the technology should be, and we should all push for for the future and dream bigger. And these things could all significantly change how transactions are made in e-commerce, and I guess in anything really. So I think as a startup in general, we just have to be really thinking about these potentials, and be ready to act fast when these new trends emerge, for sure.
Well, thank you guys so much for being in this episode. I truly enjoyed this conversation. I think it has been one of the most dynamic when it comes to perspective on Beyond Borders. So thank you so much for your time.